Hi. At the beginning of 2023, I was invited to translate the book Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson into Chinese. Later that year, in September, the book was released globally in both Chinese and English. The Chinese edition quickly sold out and eventually became the best-selling business book of the year. As an entrepreneur, I'm extremely busy, but I took on this translation project anyway, partly because of Elon Musk and partly because of Walter Isaacson. For those who don't know, Walter is a legend in the field of biography writing. Graduated from Harvard and Oxford, he has served as an editor of Time and as chair and CEO of CNN. He's now a professor at Tulane University. His work includes global bestsellers like Steve Jobs, Benjamin Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, and Einstein. His biography of Steve Jobs in 2011 became Amazon's #1 seller and was named one of the best books of the year by Time magazine. Interestingly, it took Steve Jobs 3 attempts to finally get Walter to say yes to write a book about him. As for Elon, within just 15 minutes of Walter saying yes to write his biography, Elon almost immediately posted that news out on Twitter with excitement. But Walter made it clear from the start, Elon would have no control over the content and wouldn't get to read the book before publication. So as a translator, read and work on the book earlier than 99% of the people on this planet, including Elon himself. How could I possibly miss that opportunity, no matter how busy I was? And when Elon Musk was released in September 2023, I participated in many book promotion events, met numerous enthusiastic readers, shared my reflections, and answered countless questions. Along the way, I also accumulated a list of questions that I hope to ask Walter himself. So in November 2024, a year after the book's release, I finally had the chance to talk to Walter. We spoke for about an hour, starting with why he chose to write about Elon. We delved into his writing process, the next book he's working on, Elon's childhood problems, the differences between Elon and Steve, how Elon manages his time so effectively, his support for Trump, his ways for managing people, money, and strategy, why he bought Twitter, Tesla's demanding work culture, and Walter's advice for the younger generation. By the end of the conversation, I couldn't help but admire Walter's philosophy. True mastery lies in simplicity. Walter's success comes from his genuine curiosity and authenticity, and nothing more. That's also why Walter exudes such calmness and humility, which made our conversation very enjoyable. Below is the full version of my conversation with Walter Isaacson. Please enjoy. All right, so first off, I want to start with you. As a big fan of yours, I went through all of your books and had the privilege of promoting some of them, like Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, and most recently, Elon Musk. And for Steve Jobs, it took Steve 3 attempts to finally get you to say yes to write a book about him. So my first question is, what was it like when it comes to Elon, and why Elon? What was your decision-making process, and what characteristics of him attracted you the most?
I look for people who are entrepreneurial and innovative, not just people who are smart. That's what was true about Steve Jobs. And by the way, that's what was true about Leonardo da Vinci or Jennifer Doudna. They're able to think creatively and out of the box. When I was thinking about who I should do next after I did Jennifer Doudna, who wrote about gene editing, who invented gene editing technologies, I had a friend who knew Elon Musk well, and he said, you should do Elon. So Musk and I talked on the phone for about an hour and a half one day. And I said to him, if I'm going to do you, there are 2 conditions. One is I don't want to do it just based on a few interviews. I want to be by your side for 2 years, whenever I want, at every meeting, nothing off limits. And he went, okay. And then I said, and you have no control over the book. You don't get to read it in advance. And he said, okay. And then I said, well, that sounds interesting. And then about 20 minutes later, I was with some friends and they said, oh, you're writing about Elon. And I said, how do you know? He said, oh, he just tweeted out, Walter is writing my biography. So that's how we got started.
Okay, sounds really interesting. And many people would compare Elon with Steve. I know there are a lot of similarities between the two, but you probably know them the best. So, from your opinion, what are the top three differences between them?
I think that uh, Elon Musk cares about manufacturing and executing more than Steve Jobs did. Steve Jobs focused on the beauty, the product, making it an object of desire, whether it was the Macintosh or the iPhone or the iPod. But once he had finished designing it and conceiving it, he just sent it over to be manufactured overseas. And he never visited the factories. Elon Musk knows that vision is very important, but vision without execution is just hallucination. And so he spends a lot of his time on the factory floor figuring out how do we manufacture things? How do we make them at scale? And so I walked with Musk many times in the factory lines of Tesla, at the rocket ship assembly lines in Texas, and realized that manufacturing and engineering were his strengths. There are some other differences, which is I think Musk is even more of a risk taker than Steve Jobs was. Steve Jobs is a little bit more spiritual and centered at times. He doesn't, but they were both very demanding bosses, and that's what made them great, as well as hard to be around at times.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And regarding your book, Elon is probably halfway through his career, even though the first half is dazzling, second to none. But no one can guarantee that he won't achieve more for the second half of his career. So people would think, including me, will you continue to shadow him, follow him, and maybe someday in the future, Elon really shot up the Starship to Mars, or maybe, achieved AGI? Will you update your book to make it more comprehensive?
Well, I think the book right now is pretty complete. If you read all the way to the end of the book about him getting involved in politics and the rabbit hole and how he does that, or launching the first Starship, which is, of course, as you know very well, at the end of the book, nothing that's happened since then changes the Elon Musk that you find in that book. So I'm not ready to update it yet, but indeed, he may go in and change the US government and he may get Starship up all the way to Mars someday. And he'll always remain interesting. But I think the foundation of what you need to know about Elon Musk is there in the book. And there's not a paragraph I would change.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And from your conversation with Lex Friedman, I listened to that pod as well. And you said that we all need to know our superpowers, like you not being cut as executive in a high intense organization because you have too much empathy for people. And later you
Right.
discover your superpower as observer. I'm curious, what elements consist of your superpower and how did you discover that? Can we do the same?
I have a very deep curiosity, and that's something any listener, any person you know could have. In fact, we all have a deep curiosity when we're kids, and then we lose it. Grown-ups may tell us, quit asking so many silly questions. I've tried to be curious and open to what other people are doing. And as you know, a lot of writers and journalists, they want to assert their own opinions or fight for their own, uh, uh, causes, and that's great. But for me, I want to be very open. I want to listen to people, and I think I have I won't call it a superpower because it's a power any person could have, but I have the power of being able to deeply listen to somebody when they're talking or when they're just acting. I can observe them deeply and listen to them deeply and make a connection because of that. And I would guess that especially writers, but all of us would do well by trying to be a little bit more curious every day of our lives and also listening more deeply and observing more intensely the people around us.
And in my opinion, your superpower is more than just being an observer, but also a great storyteller. I think you weave the story like no one else. So, what's your secret recipe on that? Do you have your own first
When I
principle
grew
when it
up,
comes to storytelling?
well, when I grew up here in Louisiana, I had a mentor named Walker Percy. You've heard me talk about him. And he was a novelist. And I was very young, and I kept saying, "What are you trying to preach to people in your novels?" And he said, "There are two types of people who come out of Louisiana, preachers and storytellers." He said, "For heaven's sake, be a storyteller. The world has too many preachers." And if you're from the South in the United States and you're from New Orleans, you spend a lot of your time having dinners with friends and telling stories. And I think that's how we make sense of the world, is we create narratives, we tell stories. It's what the Bible does, it's what Homer does when he sends Odysseus off on his Odyssey. It's let me tell you a story. And so I think another trait that I have, and perhaps more people would want to try to have, is that let's not always try to be preachers. Let's sometimes be storytellers.
Yeah, the six magic words. Let me tell you a story, right?
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong. I noticed that you didn't mention too much about Elon's crypto stance in your book, but he's certainly, involved in a lot of crypto. How did you choose from a pool of materials and weave the whole story? And what was your standard?
Well, he was not that involved in Bitcoin or the blockchain. As I say in the book, when he was taking over Twitter, his brother, and for that matter, Sam Bankman-Fried, were pushing him to have Twitter, now X, based on the blockchain and to use the blockchain as the foundation for it. And Musk thought about it and decided no. So he did not respect Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX and others who were going all in on the blockchain and, for that matter, Bitcoin. But Elon, being a funny guy, was amused by some cryptocurrencies, especially Doge, which is his, sort of meme currency, a cryptocurrency. And so he's gotten involved in that a little bit, and I described his involvement with Doge. But if I'm looking at the 20 things that get him up every morning excited, being involved in cryptocurrency doesn't make the top 20.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And from your observation, why there is no Elon or Steve elsewhere? Especially for Elon, he started off as a immigrant from, South Africa, went to Canada, didn't find his place, and finally got to the US, and where, he became who he is. So why are they all in the US? And or to be more specific, the Chinese readers want to know that when will China have their own Elon or Steve to think, differently or send people to Mars someday? What, the US did right to attract those top talent from all over the world.
Well, I can think of nobody better to answer that question than you, Chris, because you know both China and Silicon Valley well. And if you want to, I'll let you give a bit of an answer. But first, I'll give you what I think Elon Musk's answer would be,
Mhm.
is that the United States has always been a nation of risk takers,
Yeah.
that you're allowed to fail in the United States and you still get more funding if you fail, and that there's a certain type of entrepreneurial free spirit nature in the United States that people can challenge and question things. And I think Elon Musk got involved in politics recently because he fears that the United States might be losing that. that it might be cracking down on free speech. It might be trying to put guardrails around people who take too many risks. He says we now have more regulators in the United States than risk takers. So that was one reason he got involved in politics, but it's also the reason that I would say since the end of World War II, the past 75 years, America has been more entrepreneurial than Europe or parts of Asia, or been more inventive, but it's not been as good at executing on things. And Elon Musk fears that had there not been a change in political thinking here, we may have become over-regulated and too bureaucratic.
Yeah, that's certainly true. For the record, I was an entrepreneur back in China and then became an entrepreneur here in the US. So I certainly feel, the difference between the two countries. But that's another topic. Maybe we can cover that someday else. And
Maybe someday I get to interview you on that topic.
hope so. Thank you so much. And you wrote a lot of, best-selling biographies. And I'm curious which one or ones you like the most, like the top three books that you're most proud of.
I think Benjamin Franklin is interesting because he's the person who brings people together to find common values. I very much admire Elon Musk, but he can be polarizing and divisive. And I think the world needs now people who are unifying, who help people realize that all of us humans have a certain set of common desires and goals and values. So nowadays in the United States, I kind of urge people to read the Benjamin Franklin book, because whatever your politics, most of us can agree on the fact that we've become too divided, that we're not civil enough in discussing our differences. I love the book, The Code Breaker, on Jennifer Doudna, because I think the life sciences will be the new frontier. As you know, in China, they're very much taking the lead in many things involving life sciences, and especially genetic editing and the use of molecules as the new microchips, where we can program molecules to do things. And I think that's an area of cooperation, potentially, between the United States and China, is understanding that technology. And then, of course, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk teach us to be entrepreneurs, to actually change the world by imagining and then inventing and then creating new things.
Yeah, definitely. My favorite twos are, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk for sure. And because I'm an entrepreneur
That's
myself.
because you're a young entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. So now you finished Elon. I was wondering who's next? Any, interesting names, and what are the criteria when it comes to picking the next candidate?
At the moment, I've begun working on a biography of Marie Curie, the French Nobel Prize winning chemist and physicist who first discovers the concept of radiation and then isolates radium and polonium, wins a Nobel Prize both in chemistry and physics. And it helps set the stage for the 20th century, because that was a century in which physics took over chemistry and everything else. And the notion of understanding how the atom works is crucial to understanding the 20th century. I like to do living characters and then go back and do historical characters because they're both interesting. And so at the moment, I'm going page by page through Marie Curie's notebooks to figure out how did she make her discoveries.
Okay, sounds good. Can't wait to see it. And when is that? When you're gonna finish that?
Probably in 2 years.
2 years? Okay, sounds good. All right, let's shift gears and go back to Elon. So you shadowed Elon for 2 years, and a lot of the readers are curious, is there a difference between the PR version of Elon and the real version of him?
I think the version you see in the book is, of course, the real version because I spent so much time just sitting there, watching him, looking at his face, looking at the veins in his neck, looking at the way his eyes work, listening to him as he just talked and expressed himself and watched as he handled people. And Elon has many personalities. In fact, in the book, you see, I discuss that there's a multiple personality syndrome there, maybe not disorder, but maybe just a syndrome, in which there's times when he's really silly. There's times when he's deeply focused. There's times when he gets into what I call, and his girlfriend Grimes calls demon mode, in which he just gets very dark and doesn't yell and scream, but just gets very dark and intense. And so I could watch him in a given day, sometimes in a given hour, just cycle through those different personalities.
Yeah, I'm really, appreciated to see the real version of him. Otherwise, all I see is the PR version of him on the news and on Twitter, probably. So,
Right. Well, I think, he's such a controversial
yeah,
figure, in some ways polarizing figure, that people demonize him in parts of the mainstream media here in the United States. And then also people worship him and canonize him. Uh, and both are oversimplifying what is a very complex, interesting man.
yeah, exactly. And I'm sure a lot of things happened between you two. Any interesting stories you can share with us, especially the ones that are not included in the book?
Yeah. I asked him when I was writing the book, what's off limits? He said, nothing. He said, you can sit in every meeting, nothing is off limits. So 99% of anything I found interesting. And as you said, I like being a good storyteller, and being a good storyteller means you have to know what's interesting and how to convey it. So that's all in the book. There are a few things that I left out of the book that involve his children. As you know, in the book, I talk about his daughter, Vivian Jenna Wilson is her name now, transitioning, having been Elon's firstborn surviving child, having been named Xavier. Uh, the child transitions and becomes a daughter. That's in the book because that's very essential to understanding who he is. But there were times when I would be with him at his house or when he was with his younger children. And since they were all under the age of 18 when I did the book, there were things about them that I did not put into the book except when I asked their permission. So you'll see Griffin, one of the children, born the same time as Vivian Jenna was. He's in the book. He didn't mind. He said, fine, use me. But he said, don't, my brother Damien doesn't want to be in the book. So there are some things about the younger children I did not put in the book.
Okay, gotcha. And let's talk about the bias. So during the past 2 years, you and Elon had a lot of, interactions, text exchanges, hangouts, and Elon respects you a lot. And I wonder if that, proximity can potentially affect the way you look at him, more or less. I'm not sure if Elon has that, reality distortion feel like Steve Jobs, but I'm curious, how did you handle the bias and stay objective?
I tried to handle it by being very transparent and upfront with the reader, as you know. And so if I found myself being swayed by Elon one way or the other, I would confess to the reader, here's what he's doing, and here's how I've changed my thinking a little bit on it. But you be the judge. I let the reader be the judge of that. And yes, the more you understand a person, uh, the more you may be biased to trying to explain the reality. behind that person. And some people could say, well, you're excusing him. You're excusing him for being mean to people because he had a bad childhood. And I said, no, I'm just telling you the story. You can decide whether or not to excuse him. But yes, the more I understood him, the more I tried hard to let the reader understand him fully. Now, there's the flip side of your question, which I will call the Heisenberg principle, which is, as you know, Werner Heisenberg said, if you observe a particle, it may change its position uh, or velocity or motion. Um, and the question is, when I observed Elon, did that change who Elon was? And I observed him so long and in so many situations that people around him said, no, he's not changing his behavior because you're around. Sometimes we wish he would change his behavior, but he's acting the exact same way when you're around as when you're not around.
Hmm. Interesting. And you talk about the childhood. Let's look at the Elon's life journey. It actually consistently reminds me of a quote from the psychoanalyst Alfred Adler. It goes, "A lucky person's lifetime is cured by childhood, while an unlucky person's lifetime is spent curing childhood." Elon was unlucky as a child, got abused, mistreated, and got even tortured, both mentally and physically. But I was wondering, without that torment, can he really become who he is today? What do you think?
Well, I do think that there are people who led perfectly happy childhoods who become quite successful, but it is true that most of the people I've written about felt like outsiders when they were growing up, whether it was Leonardo da Vinci growing up in a small village, uh, being born out of wedlock, his father won't legitimate him, illegitimate child, left-handed, gay, distracted. And so he always feels like a bit of an outsider. Steve Jobs being abandoned by his birth father, put up for adoption, and his adoptive family. And so he's raised by a second adoptive family. Uh, Barack Obama said, I think every successful man is either trying to live up to the expectations of his father or live down the sins of his father. And in his case, Obama said it was both, which is just like the quote you just read. So I do try to explain what shapes a person. Uh, in my case, I had a very happy childhood here in New Orleans and wonderful parents. Maybe that shaped me in a certain way, but Elon had a very difficult time with his father, who was psychologically abusive.
Yeah, and I actually asked Elon's mom, May Musk, in 2020, what was the best investment you've ever made? She said that it's her time spent with her kids. But I think Elon spent most of his childhood with his father, Arrow. So what are the roles May and Arrow played in shaping Elon's personality, respectively?
Well, that's a theme of the book. It begins with him and his father, Errol, uh, going through all sorts of psychological abuse. But there's also that moment when Elon decides to move away from his mother's house. His mother and his father are divorced, and move into his father's house. And that's something you have to read the book to understand why Elon finally decides to do that, even though his father is difficult and psychologically rough on him. And then you see throughout the book how battling the demons of his father has become a theme of his life. And even now, as he becomes, Elon Musk, more interested in conspiracy theories and sometimes very populist, anti-immigrant, whatever it may be, theories, that's the same as his father. So I think one of the many themes in the book is something that May Musk told me at the beginning, which is the danger for Elon is that he becomes his father.
Yeah. Um, I'm a father. I have a 7-year-old. I just want my child to be happy, nothing more. But for Elon, do you think he's happy? What was his, mental status? He's so
Yeah,
anxious,
I
so
think
much
that
pressure. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of adjectives you could use for Elon, and there are a lot of things that he feels he wants in life to pursue. But happiness is not on top of that list. He's not necessarily happy most of the time, and he's not necessarily just seeking to maximize his own personal happiness. As he told me in the book, whenever things are going really well, as they were, say, in 2022, when he became the richest person on earth and person of the year at Time magazine, he says, I'm uncomfortable because I always want to push myself. I always want to move to the next level of the game. And he says, I was built for a storm. I wasn't built for calm and peace and happiness. And that goes back perhaps to his childhood. One of his wives said he associates torment and he associates drama and turmoil with love. And so I don't think, I think if he wanted to seek happiness, he's the richest person on earth, probably. And he could find happiness the way other people do by taking time off, by buying a yacht, by having a vacation home on an island. But that's not what Elon wants.
Okay. And for Elon, one thing, interesting is that he seems to have a great empathy for humanity, but little or no empathy for people around him. And that puzzled me actually. What's your take on that? Isn't that contradictory?
Well, his brother Kimball said that Kimball was the one who got the empathy gene in the family. He cares about the feelings of others around him. And Elon can be very, generous at times. He certainly cares about humanity, as you say, but he is able and almost built in a way that doesn't make him as receptive to or caring about the emotions of the people around him as much as, say, I would do. And he told me that that's one of his powers, and it's one of my weaknesses, is I care too much, he said, meaning talking about me. I care too much that people around me like me. I care too much about making them happy, which is why I will never get a rocket to Mars. I'll never lead us into the era of electric vehicles. He said when he was playing the game Polytopia, he says, empathy is not your friend. You're not supposed to be sitting there calculating your actions on how it appeals to other people. So I think he would be one of the first to admit, although his brother and everybody who's worked for him would also say it as well, that Elon Musk doesn't have as much of the emotional empathy that other people have. And that's both a strength and a weakness.
Yeah, interesting. And Elon, I think, is definitely addicted to risk, just like you mentioned. And most recently, he bet heavily on Trump, went all in and won. And why do you think, why do you think he got himself so deeply involved in politics? He doesn't seem to be, that kind of person 2 years ago. But,
Right.
right now he's a big
As
part.
you know from the book, about 2 years ago, he becomes more interested in politics and more dismissive of the Democratic Party in the United States. He doesn't like the very strict COVID crackdowns that were done. He doesn't like the bureaucracy. He doesn't like the Democrats who are governing California, one of whom put out a tweet saying, something nasty, Elon, using what we call the F word here. Also, President Biden didn't invite him to the electric vehicle summit that he did and gave General Motors credit for bringing us into the world of electric vehicles. And then there was what we call in the United States wokeness, political correctness, where he blames that for causing his firstborn child to become what Musk insists is being very left-wing Marxist, and also her ideology and transitioning. All of that went into making Musk political. And up until the beginning of this year, he was political and becoming more pro-Republican. But finally, he decides, which is always the case with Elon, that if he's going to go in, he's going to go all in. And that's when a few months ago, he decided to go all in for Donald Trump because he felt the Democrats were hurting entrepreneurship and free speech and other things in the United States.
Yeah, and he finally won. Good for him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like he in the book there's a chapter called Mechazilla, and it's about those arms in the launch tower of Starship, the biggest rocket ever made. And he went all in the book about, I'm going to be able to land the rocket upright and have the arms catch it. And as you know, the book ends with one of his first Starship launch, and now we have it so those arms catch it. He goes all in when he believes in something, whether it's politics or a type of battery or a type of rocket ship.
Yeah, exactly. And Trump talked about it a lot, like the catching the rocket. Yeah, and let's talk about his mission. You said that he's driven by three missions: making humanity multiplanetary, and entering the era of sustainable energy, and making sure AI is safe and aligned with human values. And on top of that, do you think he has a higher mission, or like, an ultimate goal of life?
Well, as you said, he doesn't have a lot of empathy for the individual people around him at times. He can be rough, he can be cold at times. But at the other extreme, he has this feeling about humanity. And that's what ties things together as a grand mission. Ever since he was a lonely child with no friends, sitting in the corner of the bookstore reading science fiction, like Isaac Asimov or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he became worried about whether humanity would survive. And he thought of himself, imagined himself as a superhero trying to save humanity. And so that's what drives him to make humanity a multiplanetary species that explores other planets. That's what drives him to have sustainable energy on this planet. That's what drives him to make sure our robots and our artificial intelligence don't turn on us.
And that's, regarding his mission, I study a lot of his work, and I do have a theory, and I want to hear your opinion about it. I saw an interview of Elon a few years ago, and I think on the foundational level, Elon wants to explore the nature of the universe, finding the meaning of life. And he said that himself. And to do that, you have to ask the right question. He said it himself. But the humanity actually doesn't know how to ask the right questions because we have so many, limitations. So what Elon is doing is actually, in my opinion, two things. First, he's trying to extend the chance of survival for humanity so that we can live long enough to ask the right question. That's why he wants to have more kids and encourage everybody to have more kids. And he's so against the woke culture and against military conflicts around the world. And secondly, he wants to push the boundary of humanity by taking us to another planet, namely Mars, physically out of Earth, so that we might have a new perspective to look at the universe. That way, we might be able to ask the right question. That's why he has such a clear sense of urgency to get on Mars. So, in my opinion, he's basically buying us more time and space. In that sense, he's like all the great philosophers. The only difference is that he's going after the meaning of life or the nature of the universe by doing what he does in business world, like SpaceX, Tesla, XAI, and so forth. I'm not sure if this theory makes sense to you, but I'm happy to hear your
It
take.
does make sense to me. It's a very good theory, and you've studied Musk well. As a young kid, among the science fiction books he read was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which has, of course, a computer that's supposed to answer what is the meaning of life in the universe. And the computer actually says, here's your answer, but you haven't asked the right question yet. And so Musk, as you say, is on this quest to say, what are the right questions we need to answer in order to understand the universe and to make sure that human consciousness, which may be unique in the universe, continues to survive. And that may seem like an odd mission, but I know that's one of the things that truly drives him.
Thank you so much for confirming my speculation on that. And if I'm not mistaken, you describe your book as a how-to guide, but many would argue that it's a bit of, survivorship bias. They argue that you cannot really become the next Elon by reading his book. What do you think? And what do you want people to take away from your book?
Oh, I would disagree with you. I don't see my book as a how-to book. I see my book as a biography. It tells a story. And it has cautionary parts in it, how not to, what not to do, as well as things to do. But I don't write how-to books. A lot of other people write how to be a success or 12 secrets to being a leader or being creative. I write biographies. And you shouldn't try this on your own. You should not say, all right, I'm going to be just like Elon Musk. Unless you know you can get a rocket to Mars, you should be yourself. You shouldn't say, I'm going to be Steve Jobs. I'm going to be Elon Musk. So I hope people, if they read biographies, they realize that the most important lesson is to know thyself. And for me, I had to learn, I'm not going to be an Elon Musk. I'm not going to be able to run CNN or Time Magazine the way he ran Tesla or SpaceX. But we each have to understand how other people operate.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And let's talk about his time management. So he's running 6+ companies, and he's got extreme attention to details. And how's that even possible? And how did he manage to do it?
He can focus in a serial fashion. At one point, I said he was a multitasker, but that's wrong. He's a serial tasker, which means he can spend one full hour and a half, 2 hours, looking at some detail, say, of the Raptor engine on the Starship rocket and whether or not it needs a heat shield. And then, boom, he can switch his mind to figuring out how do we make Twitter into X, and how do we have a moderate or not moderate the content on it. And then he'll switch to how do we do a new manufacturing line for a robo-taxi. And so he's like Napoleon going onto the battlefield, wielding his sword, so usually in a very specific part of the battlefield. And he says, if you have good people around you, they will learn from the way you act on the battlefield. And you can focus on very detailed things and let your team handle the other things.
And do you think Elon is genetically more energetic? And also, is that true for the other great people you wrote about in the past?
No, I don't think, I mean, yes, he's got a whole lot of energy, but he stays up very late, but he'll sometimes sleep late in the morning. I don't think these people are the type of robots who don't need sleep or that have huge energy. I think it's useful that he's energetic and that Steve was energetic and Jennifer Doudna was, but that's not the main trait that they have. The main trait they have is they can be intense, they can be focused.
Serial tasker. Yeah. All right. And as an entrepreneur myself, I'm also trying to figure out how to spend my time wisely. Normally, three things are always on the top of my list: people, money, strategy. I spend most of my time on those things, like many other entrepreneurs. And my question is Elon doing the same thing? If so, what aspect he spends the most time with? People, money, or strategy?
I think strategy first, and that includes mission. Like, what is the mission of SpaceX? Well, it's to get humanity to Mars. What is the strategy? Well, we'll build the internet in low Earth orbit with Starlink, and that will fund our mission to get humanity to Mars. He's not very good at what you would call human resources. He can be rough on his team,
Yeah.
but he's able to attract the most amazing people to work with him, who can put up with him and who can learn from his leadership style. That's Gwen Shotwell at SpaceX, along with Mark Jancosa. That's a lot of people at Tesla and his companies. But I would say mission and strategy is where he starts.
Yeah, and you talk about people. You refer Elon as a magnet for great talent. Their team is
Mhm.
full of hardcore A players. They'd rather be burned out than bored, right? And but how did Elon do it? I mean, what's the relationship between Elon and his team?
Well, like Steve Jobs, he attracts only A players, and 80% of the people who are a part of that team may get burned out, may get pushed out. He can be tough at times. Steve Jobs told me, he said, when he was talking about my management style, and once again, like Elon, he said, "Well, you're too empathetic. If I have B players on my team, I have to tell them they're bad, they stink, they ought to leave." And so I think that both Musk and Jobs do not have tolerance. They don't put up with um, second-rate players. And as Jobs told me in the book, and it's also Musk says it in the book, if you get rid of all B players, you'll get more A players because A players want to work with other A players. They don't want to be on a team with mediocre people.
Yeah, and like you said, he's being rough on people. I don't want to use that word, but do you think there is any gaslighting effect there?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't use
Yeah,
that word either.
gaslighting. So meaning that deliberately, manipulate other people's emotion to work for you. That's the psychological word for that.
Yeah, I think that there's more of a magnetism that
Okay.
Steve Jobs had and Elon Musk had, which is, do you want to be comfortable and have an easy work life, or do you want to be part of a really grand mission? Steve Jobs once said to John Scully when he was trying to hire him, John Scully was working for Pepsi. And Steve Jobs said, "Do you want to change the universe, or do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life?" Likewise, I have people in the book, Lucas Hughes, many others in the book who find themselves burned out at times by Musk, but they're attracted to the mission and they think, well, maybe I should go back.
Yeah, that's what Phil actually told me. And he told me that even till this day, Tesla's engineers are working their butt off to meet Elon's goal. And there's no 9 to 5, there's always, 24/7. And it's really hard to imagine this kind of intensity, exists in such a big corporation like Tesla. What do you think of those working with the Elon people like Phil? What's their profile and what drives them?
Phil Dwan, whom you know, is one of the reasons Tesla is a success. Brilliant person. And it's one of the reasons Elon Musk is a success. Because even though he drives people like Phil to work very hard, and they don't have a perfect work-life balance, they're on 24/7 in some ways, he inspires them on a sense of mission that he's on. And uh, I am always amazed by the intensity of the team, both at SpaceX and at Tesla.
Okay. And we got three more questions. I hope you still have time. Is that okay? Okay.
Three more. Great.
All right. Let's talk about Elon's purchase of Twitter, now X. You dedicated a big portion of your book telling the whole story. It seems to me that that part of, part of the purchase was impulsive and chaotic. But my question is, most billionaires in the US seem to be interested in buying media when they get the chance because they, at the end of the day, need that power. It's funny that there is a one quote from Elon in your book. He goes, I think it's important to have a digital public square that's inclusive and trusted. He paused and then he goes, how else are we going to get Trump elected in 2024? And you added, it was a joke. It sure was a joke back then, but it doesn't seem to be a one, right now. Do you think it's inevitable for Elon to do something like this, buying a media, even if, it's not Twitter?
I think he bought Twitter because he loved being on Twitter, because he felt that the media and social media were suppressing free speech, because he felt the media and social media were drifting to the left and were too much pro the Democrats. But it wasn't something that he had been calculating for a long time. I think, like a lot of what he does, he trusted his gut and he did it on impulse. And as soon as he made the offer and it was accepted, as you know from the book, he had second thoughts like, why am I doing this? But he became more convinced that he had to help change the direction of American media and American politics. Whether you agree with him or not, he decided that was part of his mission. And in the end, I think he was very happy that he ended up buying Twitter. And he did to it what I think he's going to try to do when he goes in to help the Trump administration, is cut away 80% of the bureaucracy, of the fat there, and say, we're going to be a lean and tough machine. He's very disruptive. That's why Tesla doesn't feel like a big company that can't move quickly. He disrupts it. He fires whole divisions at Tesla every now and then. And likewise, he did that at Twitter. And people said, well, Twitter will quit existing. It's going to fail. It's not going to, he's destroyed it. Well, in some ways, the old Twitter definitely doesn't exist anymore, but he's made X, which was probably the most influential media force in this past election. And as he says in the book, had to do it to elect Trump. He does that to get a rise out of his kids. That was at a dinner with his kids where he says that. And he was joking. But like a lot of his jokes, they turn into be only half joking because there's a little kernel of truth into any joke he makes.
Okay. And one last question. So you observed a lot of great minds and innovators of our time. You've seen their similarities and differences. So overall, what's your suggestions to the younger generation who want to be the innovators themselves someday in the future?
Well, you have to stay curious. You have to stay intense. You have to take risks. You have to not just be smart, but be creative and imaginative. But above all, you have to know your own strengths and weaknesses. To get back to something we talked about before, you should not read a biography of a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk and say, let me try to copy everything he did. You should learn from the intuition these people had, from the risks these people took, from the focus they did, from the curiosity that they had, and then do it in your own way. And you should figure out how to make teams of people who can work with you. When I asked Steve Jobs what was the greatest product he ever made, I thought he'd say the iPhone or the Macintosh, but he said, no, it's the team, because making an iPhone or a Macintosh is hard, but having a team that will continually make great products is the really important thing. And that's true with Elon Musk as well. He's not only made the biggest rocket ship ever, he's not only been the only person to be able to make rockets that can land upright. He's not only been the person who brought us into the era of electric vehicles, but he's made teams that can do things like transform X, transform our transportation system, bring us into the era of electric vehicles, likewise recreate the internet in outer space and land rockets upright. So focus not only on your own talents, but focus on where you need people around you to form a team, because creativity is a team sport and entrepreneurship is a collaborative effort.
Yeah, that's very inspiring. Thank you so much. And this has been great and more than inspiring. I learned so much. Thank you again for the opportunity. Truly appreciate it. And
And let me also praise you, Chris, because you did a remarkable job on this interview. You, I think, know more than any other interviewer I've had. You
thank
did a great job on the translation, and you're doing a great job both for China and the United States for understanding how entrepreneurship is done in both countries and trying to lead us into the future in which we will cooperate in our entrepreneurship.
yeah, thank you so much. And in the future, if there's
I'm a
anything
fan.
I can do to help, I couldn't be happier to do it.